Hey everyone, and welcome to the SpecTennis podcast. Today we have a very special show. We have an interview with Bill Patton, who just has a really long resume of amazing accomplishments. I might, if I miss anything, try to name what you're currently doing. But he's the author of Visual Training for Tennis. He's the author of The Art of Coaching High School Tennis. He's a 30-year industry tennis maverick, and he's just a super accomplished tennis coach. And looking forward to interviewing him today.
All right. Thank you for that. That was very nice.
So what's going on? Let's start with high school tennis first. What would you say is going on with the high school tennis realm?
Okay. Well, where we left our heroes before the pandemic, there were 340,000 high school tennis players across the country. So the USTA has a membership of approximately 800,000 people. 85 to 90% of them probably would not be members if they didn't have to play in leagues or tournaments, right? That's the consensus that I'm hearing. But 340, so almost half of that number are the number of high school tennis players. So that is the second largest grouping of serious tennis players in this country. So one of my goals, and this is something that I pump up often with all the stakeholders who want to see tennis grow, is I try to get everybody on board with promote high school tennis to one more new kid this year, or find a way to support your local high school coach. I mean, maybe you have old rackets that you haven't been using. They're 2 or 3 years old, and you can drop them off, and now a kid that's been using a $39 aluminum racket can get an upgrade to a fine graphite frame. Do something to help out your local high school team. Go watch their match and say good match to a kid after they get done playing. There's a lot of different things you can do. Maybe you have some balls that are gently used that you can drop off to the coach, or maybe you can make some connections. Maybe the coach doesn't know what they're doing. Maybe they do. Maybe you can get them The Art of Coaching High School Tennis as a gift. With that book, there are 3 main comments that I get with The Art of Coaching High School Tennis. And the first one is, it saved my life. And I think those people are exaggerating, right? But that's how they feel, and then because there's a pretty steep learning curve to becoming a high school coach of any sport, but taking high school tennis, an individual sport largely, and turning it into a team sport, it has a special challenge to it. The other comment that I get is from coaches who've been doing it for a little while, and they've been struggling a little bit, and so they say that it gives them a foundation for success, so they can now no longer make some of the mistakes they've been making. They've identified some things that they can change. And then finally, there have been some coaches who've been doing it 20, 30 years, and they have a track record of success, but they got themselves into a rut. And so it gave them a new perspective on changing things up just enough to make it more interesting for them and their players. And then that just makes it more fun for everybody. So I had somebody say, oh man, I read this one chapter and I realized that for 20 years I've been doing the wrong thing. And so that's the idea. I mean, the book is born out of, over 30 years of making a lot of mistakes and learning the hard way. And so the idea is to shorten the learning curve for the high school coach so that the programs can be more successful, and I'm pretty sure that the book has gone out to about 2,000 people right now. So that's hopefully 2,000 programs that have been made better.
That's great. And I'm assuming that this applies not only to your high school coach who is new to tennis, maybe is the history teacher at the school, but also to tennis teaching pros, because it's a completely different thing. Just because you can teach somebody tennis doesn't mean you can orchestrate a successful high school team, would you say?
I've seen a lot of really good players and good private coaches absolutely fail at high school tennis. So I've seen absolute failure, but I've also just seen them not really maximize all that they can do because there's so many more things to coaching high school tennis than teaching strokes. In fact, that may be one of the least important things to do with your high school team. So if you're obsessing about strokes, then you don't have a smart conditioning program. One of the interesting things for me is that I've gained a huge advantage over other coaches just because we train smarter. So we have a very dialed in, periodized schedule for training the players, and then other teams, they're at the end of the season, they're gassed, and we're just getting our legs, we're just getting tuned up to go all out at the end. So, I have an essay out that I can share with anybody who's watching this, the 7 deadly sins of the high school tennis coach. So if you want that, just go ahead and put your email in a message to me. You'll see my email down below, but you can send me an email. I'll send you that. And because those are the mistakes that I was making, and then I changed the way I did it. And it's really fun to see that your team does pretty good in the first set, but then it starts to do even better in the second set. And then, my teams were having like a 70% winning percentage in 3-set matches. So there's that magic moment where the other team, the other team's player, their wheels fall off, and then you just know that your player's going to win because the other kid just can't even run anymore. But so smart conditioning, how to teach the mental game, how to bring your team together with good unity of purpose, and how to organize practices really well so you get the most out of each practice and achieve all the major objectives that you need to achieve in a season in order to do really well.
And you've had really impressive success stories as well, because you haven't been blessed with being the coach of a private high school. I mean, you've been with a lot of underprivileged schools, correct?
Well, there's been a mix. I have coached some low income schools and some very poor schools, but then also most of my coaching's been sort of middle class, right? And then I did coach at one very high performing high school. It was the number 3 rated academic school in California in public school. So I have it's been a mix. But I'm proud of the fact that wherever I've gone, the kids have improved a lot. And, we had one team that broke a 71 match losing streak. We had another team that broke their 37 match losing streak. We won a first title in 26 years. That team won the only 2 titles in a 54-year span at the school. Oh, we had a low income school where our girl won the first singles title in school history, 60 years. So, those kinds of things are really fun when they happen, but you have to put the work in and you have to be smart about it.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Bill. So recently you've started playing SpecTennis, incorporating SpecTennis into your program. How was your intro to SpecTennis?
Well, yours truly introduced me to it. So I feel lucky that I was one of the first ones to even know what it was. So I got this email from this guy, Nate Gross, because I had bought his match charting books. So he thought I was maybe friendly. So getting that invite was kind of cool, but then I was like, no, I'm kind of a broken down old guy, but this looks interesting. So I was very interested in it from the beginning. And I don't even think I knew what pickleball was yet at that time, maybe. But so I was always aware of it from the time that you really started it. And I'm happy about that because then it made adopting it a little easier. And then when you came out in 2018 to demo it, or maybe that was 19, I forget what year that was, but you came to my club to demo it because we were studying whether we were going to play pickleball or SpecTennis, and I got some pop paddles. We played some pop tennis with a few of the members of my club, and I think I made it for my mind that I wanted SpecTennis, and now I have a number of the paddles since now I'm an ambassador. I've got some paddles, and every once in a while I insert those into the lesson because I have a player who's struggling, and especially with kids who are sort of a little out of control, the wild ones, the paddle helps them to get under control, because it's harder to whip it around, so to speak, and the strings don't make for like an incredible slingshot experience, because the paddle has that very solid feel. So it's made a really nice bridge for getting people to play tennis. In fact, I would venture this, that if I went to those kids and I asked them, what are we playing right now? They would say tennis, right? I'm pretty sure I've referred to them as SpecTennis paddles and told them that it's a different game, but I think their perception would be that they're playing tennis and that they're building up to the time when they can use a real racket. So that's more satisfying to me, because I don't see handing someone a pickleball paddle and playing pickleball rules and teaching pickleball technique and then saying, okay, now we're going to go play tennis, because the feel will be significantly different, and I can see some resistance. Well, I was having fun with pickleball, so why would I want to do that? So whereas I think pickleball becomes I'm trying to be polite. Pickleball becomes an alternative for people who maybe are not as athletic as they once were. But it is played by athletic people at a high level. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but it is more so played by an elderly population. And I think the ultimate fate of pickleball will be decided by the generation that comes after the baby boomers. So if Gen X starts playing pickleball, then pickleball will survive. But I do believe that pickleball might go the way of the baby boomer. So SpecTennis as a way to transition into and out of tennis and still retain the same rules, the same basic feel, and the ability to play the net and play doubles in the same way, to me has a lot more potential.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you've had a great experience with it so far, and I like what you said
And I'm
about
not just saying that just because you're sitting right there. Yeah.
I like what you said about pulling out the paddles in the middle of a lesson, and you can go through a regression. I think I've found that to be very powerful with the progression regression model, where you're advancing their skills, and then if they're struggling, then you're regressing them back. And I found that with the SpecTennis, it doesn't feel like it's like a punishment, like, oh, you're not doing well, so you got to go backwards and you got to do this, and now you got to play on the kids' court and etc. They just feel like we're just using different tools to just get different outcomes, and so this outcome might be easier to achieve with this tool than with this tool.
In fact, as you're saying that, I'm kicking myself because I have this 2-5 guy that I'm working with, and he's got he has a case of the flippers, and so I'm kicking myself because I probably should have yesterday gotten him a pickleball paddle and rallied a little bit with. I mean, no. What did I say? What am I talking about? Okay, that's going to get cut out of there. So no, I should have put a SpecTennis paddle in his hand, and I'm pretty sure we could solve his problem of flipping his wrist with the use of the paddle for sure. So I think I'm going to do that next time I'm with him.
Definitely. It has a little bit more weight, or if it doesn't have more weight than a tennis racket, the weight is condensed in a smaller area. And so you find it's not comfortable to flick your wrist on the shots. And especially with kids, they'll start gravitating towards hitting with two hands, which I like to teach with two hands because it turns the shoulders right away, especially on the forehand. So getting them the habit of turning their shoulders prevents injuries in the future. A lot of people, you'll see them get tennis elbow and things like that because they're just swinging with the arm. And so SpecTennis, I think, really helps alleviate that, because if you want to get power on the ball, you're going to have to turn your shoulders and use your
Yeah.
legs.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. There's a lot of overtraining principle that's invoked with the use of the SpecTennis paddle, for sure.
Let's transition now to visual training, because you've become quite an expert in visual training for tennis. And I wanted to ask, what do you think, like, the advantages visually are of SpecTennis over pickleball?
Okay, well, first, there's the smaller paddle relative to a tennis racket, but it's also, rounded, which is nice. So, going from rectangle to rounded is, it's a little different, right? And then the way pickleball behaves with a pickleball paddle is I think even more different than it behaves with a tennis racket than the way SpecTennis paddle behaves with the ball. So there's to me there's a little bit more concussion of the flattening out of the ball into the little holes, and a little thrust given, whereas the pickleball itself might be a lot more lively, but then the pickleball paddle doesn't really absorb. So part of it is the pairing of the visual and the kinesthetic. So it's the feeling of doing that. And then, given that the kitchen changes the visual decision making process. So in tennis, if you'd been playing lots of pickleball and then all of a sudden you're getting really close to the net, then that experience of getting really close to the net could make you recoil and go, oh, wait, I'm getting into the kitchen. So this whole idea of, because you might actually want to take that low volley to have an advantage rather than letting it bounce so that you can have a little dink shot. So
I think I'm picking up what you're saying, but could you say that last part again? Like, you say, if you're used to playing pickleball and you're typically standing right behind the kitchen, then when you transition to tennis, that could visually be challenging. Could you just rephrase that one part again?
Well, it's a different decision. It's a different visual decision made in pickleball to let it bounce or not, and the default position seems to be to let it bounce, so that then you can dink, because what you're trying to do is set up the other player to hit the ball up higher, so that your partner or you can take the ball out of the air. Whereas in tennis and SpecTennis, there are advantages to taking the low volley out of the air, because you're taking away time and space from the other player. So it could lead to playing too defensively, actually, in tennis. When you're at the net, you ought to be playing much more offensively.
That makes a lot of sense. You could see people leaving balls to bounce and actually creating a more difficult half volley for themselves, because the balls in tennis and SpecTennis is going to carry after it bounces, more so than the pickleball. And so if you're playing with that kitchen mentality in SpecTennis, you're actually ending up in a defensive or even a neutral volley position rather than what you came up there to do in the first place.
Right. And another piece to it is, I've watched some really high level pickleball on YouTube. So I've watched almost entire sets of play at the national level with 5-0 and open level players. And it seems to me that inexplicably there are just errors created by the ball, that somebody had perfect form and everything looked good, and then boom, they missed. And so this is another thing about pickleball that seems a little unnerving to me, that you could miss a shot just because the way the pickleball and the paddle behave for a moment. The ball doesn't fly true all the time. So that's another advantage of spec tennis, is that the behavior of the ball and the paddle is a lot more uniform. I like to say that tennis is not a lucky sport. The ball doesn't often bounce funny, but in pickleball, it does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I was talking to Sterling Strother a while ago, his words were something along the lines of, spec tennis is the most true tennis feeling that he's experienced. So if you take a tennis racket and a tennis ball, that feeling of the tennis ball hitting the strings, and then the spec tennis paddle with the holes in it, and then that ball compressing against the paddle, he felt like that's the most true you can get without it being tennis.
Yeah, I completely agree.
What would you say in your journey with visual training? What would you say is like one takeaway for the listeners that they might not know, or I might know, about visual training for tennis or spec tennis? Just give us maybe one really good nugget so that we get them out there to Amazon buying your visual training.
Well,
But
I think one of the things that, and it's actually starting to be talked about now, this is interesting to me because I published the book in 2018, and not too many people were talking about visual skills. You'd have the occasional person who would come to a convention and talk about visual training, but then it was usually too much jargon and seemed too complicated for people, so they just kind of yawned their way through that and said, okay, that was an hour I can't get back. But what I've tried to do in the book is stay clear of too much jargon, but really give practical things that unveil the mysteries of vision. And so there are a couple of things really quick. Number one, no two people see the same way. Visual researchers say that if everybody's different, then the way that we are different more than any other aspect is our visual experience of the world. All right, so that's the first thing. So there are no cookie cutter solutions, one size fits all for how you're going to see the ball. And so that's why the book has, at least I'm saying it has 101 plus skills, drills, tips, and tricks for you to do better. But now the question was for one, so let's dig into one. And it's multifaceted though. So the number one thing that you need to do is know what your dominant eye is. So if you take your hands like so, and you might even be able to see my eye through that little hole. Can you see my eye?
yes, I can.
Okay, good. Which eye is it?
Ooh, that's tough. I'm going to say your
Okay.
right. Is it your right eye?
Well, it's hard to tell because the camera's turning me around, but it's my left eye. So I was looking through the hole at my camera with both eyes open. And then if I close my right eye, I can still see it. If I close my left eye, I can't see it. So that tells me that I'm left eye dominant. All right. We're turned around with the camera, right? But so left eye dominant. So that means I need to make sure that my left eye is really sighting the ball. That means 80% of my vision comes through this eye. So if you did nothing else than to intentionally make sure that you're turning your dominant eye towards the ball, then you're going to see it better. What a lot of people do is they unwittingly turn their head too much. Their dominant eye can't see the ball, so they're using their non-dominant eye, and they're missing a lot of shots. Now, the other thing that happens is you can pair that with your dominant hand. So if you're left eye dominant and right-handed like I am, then you're cross-dextral. And so you should do the Federer thing, which is focus on the ball from the bounce all the way into your strings, and then have your head relatively still all the way through the finishing phase of the stroke. But what people don't realize is that approximately 50% of the population is pure dextral. So doing like Federer would be wrong, actually, for you. So instead, if you're right eye dominant and right-handed, then what really does seem that, I mean, there's a lot of social proof because I've gone out on the road with this. I've gone to Phoenix, Atlanta, and taught a lot of my own private students these things. So it's been proven in my estimation, even though I don't have data to support it, is that for a pure dextral player, you want to focus on a place halfway between the bounce of the ball and your racket, and then track the ball using your peripheral vision into the frame, a la Serena Williams. And I have some really interesting pictures of professional players looking ahead of contact. Andre Agassi, who was one of the best visual players ever, you can't find a picture of him looking perfectly at contact, but you can find many pictures of him looking ahead of contact. And sometimes tennis magazines, they show you this picture of Federer, and he's looking right at the strings, and it's got a green circle, and then they show you another player looking ahead, and it has a red X, but then that's a Grand Slam champion that they're talking about. I'm like, it can't be all that bad. So there's pure dextral and there's cross dextral, and so there's one very complicated tip unpacked.
That's great. I mean, that makes so much sense. I mean, it's like you have to figure out if you're shooting a rifle, you got to figure out which eye you're gonna close for the scope.
Yes. And people who have,
you don't get that right, your aim's gonna be so far off. So why wouldn't it be the same thing with other visual sports, tennis, and maybe even something like golf? With keeping your head there versus moving past the point of contact. That was could you give two more? So we'll make this the top 3 tips for 2021. Do you have 2 more?
All right. Well, as a player or a coach, one of the most important things that you can do is reduce your anxiety level as you're getting on the court. Get yourself mentally prepared to be really calm when you're out there playing, because that mental clarity of being calm is going to help you to see more clearly. When you're meeting a student for the first time, or if you're the new student coming out for the first time, of course you're going to be anxious. There's the fear of the unknown, right? Is this guy a weirdo? I mean, can they teach? Do I have performance issues, where I feel like I have to perform for them and do well so I can be accepted? So just calm down, and take an easy warm up. I mean, I think it's really interesting to watch pros warm up because it's some of the most loosey-goosey stuff you've ever seen. I was just watching a video of Federer the other day going, oh wait, he's just, doing all this crazy stuff at the beginning of practice just to get himself loose, right? It was just amazing. It was just awesome. And, they'll just do some really easy stuff. I don't know how many times I've seen a pro walk up to the baseline and then serve and then walk back. And then as they're walking, they're serving 20 feet out and they don't care. So approach the beginnings of being out there, in a very low key, calm way. And then you can ramp up slowly with higher levels of intensity. So that's another quick one. Another one is do not attempt to keep pinpoint vision of the ball. So many people wreck themselves on that. So their eyes right on it, They've got the winning volley all lined up, and then boom, it's in the net, or it's 2 feet wide, right? And they stop and they're thinking, what's wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me. I mean, I had it all lined up. Everything was great. But the problem is that pinpoint vision actually creates a saccadic motion of your eyes because your eyes shake when they go sideways. So a better thing to do, what to do instead is trust your brain to reconcile the blur into your racket. And then, I mean, my volleying went way up when I started to do to see the ball come out of the opponent's strings, and then just trust that my brain could get the ball into my strings, even though it looks like a blur. And I very rarely miss a volley. It's really been amazing. And with my students, when I get them focused on seeing the ball come out of the opponent's racket, almost always the next ball goes dead center in the sweet spot on their racket. And, if you can do that, then your volleying is going to be a lot better.
That's great. Very applicable tips. The one about trying to be stress-free on the court because you can't see clearly when you're stressed. You have other stuff going on in your mind. You can't focus on the task at hand. I mean, I think that's amazing. I'm just getting a message from Ryan Hanrahan saying he said the live was brilliant. A Facebook message from Ryan Hanrahan out in Australia.
The boy wonder.
Thanks for watching, Ryan. He's doing some amazing things over there.
My nickname for Ryan is the boy wonder because he looks like he could be 14, but actually he's in his 30s. So yeah, he's wise beyond his years.
Yeah, definitely. So when you probably hear this all the time when you're on the court, like people make a mistake and then they say, watch the ball. Like that probably drives you nuts now that you're educated on, well, what does watch the ball actually mean? First, you need to determine if you're pure or cross-dextral, and then we don't focus solely on the ball like you were talking about pinpointing it, but there's a period where, our eyes might not be 100% focused on the ball because that can create some problems.
Okay, good. No, that's great. And so here's the problem with watch the ball. It's non-specific. There's no when and there's no where to it. So I say, see the ball come out of the strings, and that is both a when and a where, because there's a location to it, and the time is when they hit it. So if whatever tip you're giving, whatever way you're trying to attempt to locate the ball, it has a time and a place to it, then you're okay.
Great. That makes total sense. You got to have a very specific criteria for what that means.
Yeah.
Simply, hit the ball higher might not be specific enough. Like, how are you going to hit the ball higher?
Right. Yeah. So,
all right, I watched the ball and I still missed the next one, but what else can I do besides watch the ball? So,
yeah, it's like, what does it mean? It doesn't, and see, because everybody sees differently, watch the ball means something different to every player. So most existing tennis players accidentally learn to see the ball well if they made it to 4-5 and above. And I think that one of the most important factors for why people quit tennis is because they don't learn to see the ball well. And another limiting factor is that once you get to 4-5 and above, the ball starts to come faster and with a wider variety of spins. So if you haven't learned progressively better visual skills, then you won't be able to handle those shots.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think the key word that you said there was they accidentally learned to watch the ball because nobody that I know has done visual training for tennis. And I think that could really be the next big thing in training. I mean, it makes so much sense it's going to be so much easier to hit the ball if you can actually see it properly. So
yeah, recently I'm starting to see more high-level coaches actually talk about visual skills. I mean, somebody posted a Patrick Mouratoglou video the other day of him teaching about the dominant eye, and I'm like, okay, all right, good to see it, right? And more people are kind of getting in touch with me to tell me their story of how they're training it or what are they digging into. So I'm gathering a lot of resources. This 4th edition of visual training that's going to be coming out shortly is going to be much more complete. It's about 70% more content than the 3rd edition.
Great. So where can people go if they'd like to get visual training for tennis?
Well, they should probably email me directly at infinitevisioncoach@gmail.com. And then what I can do is get them on a list so that they can get one of the 99-cent ebook versions that will be available at the launch for about 24 hours, or I'll be offering the print book for the rock bottom price that Amazon will allow me to do, and I don't know what that is yet, but it'll be something under $10 for the 4th edition. So if you buy it on that first day, then you can help get it to number 1, which would be nice, and that'll be good for tennis.
Great. How far out are we looking for the?
Right now at the time of this interview, it's March 25th, 2021, and I have a target date of publishing next week, the 31st of March, but if I run into any problems, it could end up being early April, but I'm really plugging away really hard to try to get that out by the end of the month.
Great. So definitely email Bill, infinitevisioncoach@gmail.com, to get set up with that book. And then what about The Art of Coaching High School Tennis? How can they get that book?
Yeah, same thing. Just reach out, and if I get some people who are doing that, then what I might do is arrange a little sale. So if you're interested, just let me know. I'll probably even set up a little special sale for you, and we'll get you going with that. But that went into a 3rd edition in November of last year. I added a lot more usable stuff, and then also completely changed the workbook that comes along with it. So there are 2 books. There's the main book that you read, and then there's the workbook where you get all your work done. And I'm pretty proud of that workbook because I changed it around a lot to make it a lot more usable, give people more space to work, and gave more prompting questions that will help them think about the right stuff as they get ready to plan their seasons.
That's great. I love that because it's one thing to read and get the knowledge, but if you provide a way for them to actually to do the work and make it very easy for them to do it, I think they're really going to see a huge benefit. I was going to ask you one more question. What do you think about using SpecTennis with a high school team, for example? What's your take on how you could use it? Or
I think it could be amazingly effective, and I think especially for schools that are tight on space. So I've had a couple of different schools where I might have retained more players. I might not have cut if I had a space, because I had like a nice concrete area where I could keep players busy, doing something productive. But because I didn't have tennis court space for them, then I had to cut down to 24 players. But I could see, keeping 8, 10, 20, maybe up to 20 more players busy. At the last school I was at, we had 3 tennis courts, but we also had 2 basketball courts over there. So I strung up a net and I would have the kids rallying, but I would have been more comfortable with them playing SpecTennis there because I didn't want anybody to run into a basketball pole. So the space was a little weird with the layout of the poles, but easily I could have marked out some space for them to actually play games of SpecTennis and keep them busy, and get my beginners who are coming to the tennis team for the first time ever holding a racket, get them built up quickly to be able to play tennis in just a couple of weeks' time. That would have been, a lot better to provide that transition. So it's mostly about the space. You can use a lot more of your space that way. You can keep more kids busy. If for instance, you have a kid and they're just like not feeling well or whatever, or they're gassed or whatever's happening. I mean, I could see like post-match, kids get done with their match and then it's like, hey, let's go over and mess around and play a little SpecTennis over here. And you can invite the other teams over for that. And then it's more of a community building experience as well.
That's great. Well, thanks so much, Bill. I mean, I can't wait to learn more about visual training, and you just provided so much value today with high school coaching, different applications of SpecTennis and visual training. Make sure if you have any interest in any of this stuff that you reach out to Bill. infinitevisioncoach@gmail.com. Once again, thanks so much for being on the SpecTennis podcast, Bill Patton, and I'll hope to catch you next time. If you want more information about SpecTennis, head over to spectennis.com.